Hey, welcome to the West Coast Biased. I'm Andrew Nemec, joined as always by Jason Suke and Nemec. Suke, last pod, we jumped all around in talking about various things in the world of college football. I wanted to dedicate one episode specifically to the Peach Bowl, Oregon, Indiana. And because we both picked Indiana in a close one, I actually wanted to do an episode this is for Duck fans here. This is the pro slant of this game for Duck fans. It doesn't mean we're going to be absolute homers where it's like, oh, they're going to win 40-7, but a realistic look at areas where if you're a Duck fan, where can you feel good heading into this football game? And I think the very best place to start for this thing is the defensive side of the ball. I went back and watched the game again yesterday and looked for only positives, tried to look for positive views of everything. And to me, one of the things, a lot was made of Oregon's O-line struggling against Indiana's front. The same can be said on the other side of the ball. Oregon overwhelmed Indiana's offensive line, particularly inside with Amari Washington and Bear Alexander. You don't get 50 pounds, 60 pounds of muscle stronger in 6 weeks. That's going to be an advantage for Oregon in the trenches when Indiana has the football.
Yeah, Indiana, for all of the talk about how good Indiana is, and rightfully so. I mean, Indiana has earned the right to be the number one team in the country. They've earned the right to be the odds-on favorite. And look at what they've done. They've beaten what was the number 5 team in the country in the Oregon Ducks going into the playoffs. They beat the number 1 team going into the playoff in Ohio State. They absolutely manhandled an Alabama team, which wasn't playing very well, but it was as good as talent-wise, from a talent profile, as anyone in the country. So they've earned that right. But we do need to pump the brakes a little bit. Indiana is a wagon, but this isn't like Indiana is the 2000 Miami Hurricanes or anything. And at the end of the day, when you look at talent profile, Oregon is still a much more talented, quote, talented team. And where that shows up normally when Indiana or Indiana type teams. Okay. So let's take teams that have the talent profile of Indiana. Indiana is a hell of a lot closer to TCU when TCU played in the national title against Georgia than it is when like I said, Clemson played Alabama, right? Or LSU, like any of those teams, even games that were lopsided, right? When LSU took Clemson behind the woodshed, Clemson was still, from a talent standpoint, a talent profile that was still very close to LSU. It's just that that LSU team was something different. I mean, having, we know who the offensive players were on that LSU team. So normally when that shows up, it is along the lines, right? You can find skill position players, you can find receivers, you can find running backs, you can find linebackers, you can find DBs. There's a lot of small, fast guys that are running around, and you can find those guys, even quarterbacks, right? But line play is usually where it magnifies itself. And Indiana has done a really nice job this year of fortifying their lines, because last year when they played these games, where did they lose? Notre Dame and Ohio State bullied them. Indiana is a very similar team to what they had last year. But this year they solved the bully problem. But when you look at their linemen, it's not as if it is a completely different squad that's out there. Indiana, actually, when you look at it, it's not like they have a completely different player. In fact, I think only one guy came in, the center from Notre Dame, Indiana center. Other than that, it's largely the same group. And I remember when we were talking about this game, the first time they played around, the reason why I picked Oregon was offensive line. And when you do watch Indiana play, it's not the greatest O-line individually. They're very good schematically. They do a very good job of working together as a unit, but individual, especially. Like their right guard it's 74. I think it's Lynch is his name. You can get these guys. And so I do think it is worth noting that we thought going in that was still a big advantage for Oregon. Watching the game film, I still think you can make a case that is an advantage. And there are times this year where the Indiana O-line has kind of ground them down a little bit. And so, we've brought up the fact that Oregon at times goes through these offensive scuffles where they don't really have it clicking. In fact, they average about 18 points a game against the better teams on their schedule. And Indiana necessarily hasn't had that. But there are times Iowa held them to 20 points. Penn State held them to 27. And remember, that last possession was they needed to go 90 yards. They had 20 points until that last possession when they pulled that thing out of their absolute arse. Phenomenal drive. And then Ohio State, they held them to 13. And granted, Ohio State might be the best defense in the country, but that game was played 13-10. So, you can hold down Indiana's offense. And so to me, if you're Oregon, I think that the idea of this game and how you want it played, and we talked about earlier how you want to dictate terms, I do think Oregon wants to play this game a lot like the Ohio State game. I do not think Oregon wants to play a game in the 30s. I think Oregon, I actually, if you ask Dan Lanning, and truth be told, I don't think he'd mind playing a game in the teens. Because I do think the biggest advantage that Oregon has, when you look at the first time they played and just on paper, if I had to say the one area where I could say Oregon is just significantly better, it would be Oregon's defensive line versus Indiana's offensive line. And can that be enough? Can that be enough of an advantage? In the first one, it wasn't. This time, can you get that defensive line to do what they did against Texas Tech? If this game is going to be won, it's going to be because of the first round picks, right? You have at least 2 of those that are probably going to end up being first round picks, and all 4 of them are going to end up being NFL players, and you need that front 4, right? And the linebacking plays fine, but you really need the front 4. You need them to be the best unit on the field. And if they are the best unit on the field, it is the greatest equalizer in the world of football. I've said it a million times. If you can dominate a game with your front 4, you can be in any game, and Oregon has the ability to do it, but they have to play the game that they played against Texas Tech.
Yeah, I think it's striking how good Oregon was up front last time they played. Oregon really did a very nice job and nearly had a bunch of sacks. Now, nearly, horseshoes, right? That only counts in horseshoes. There we go. Thank you. It's just, they were very close. And so to say that could go slightly differently because your secondary is more experienced, you were playing a lot of freshmen, a lot of sophomores who had very little experience at that point. The secondary, and this is the next point, the secondary is better than it was week 3, week 4. Now, they weren't playing as good a competition in week 3, week 4, but there's very little doubt. I mean, part of Brandon Finney, and now everyone's forgotten that Brandon Finney had kind of a lull of 3 or 4 games where he struggled a little bit. He had some pass interference penalties. He gave up a couple big ones. Everyone's forgotten that now, and it's like, how come this kid wasn't an All-American? Second team All-Big Ten? What a bunch of haters. Well, he dominated early in the year. Then from games, 6-ish, right around the Indiana game, through 9, we saw a lull where he had some penalties. He gave up some big plays, and then he's adjusted, and now he's hit his stride again. He is playing like a lockdown corner. The secondary's better. So that's a huge piece. And this is a secondary that, to keep in mind, they played the Heisman Trophy winner in the first time they played him, and they held Mendoza to 215 yards passing. Mm-hmm. When you go back and the feel of that game, especially late, was that Indiana could get essentially any first down they wanted. They were throwing back shoulder stuff to Surratt. It just seemed like they had the magic elixir for finding that first down, making that big play. It can feel like that sometimes. It can also feel like you don't have it at all if 1 or 2 of those plays don't go your way. And I think it's really hard to replicate that where, again, this was a 2020 ball game, and we'll get into more of that. It was a 2020 ball game with just under 7 minutes to play. And then Dante Moore threw his last 2 passes were intercepted, and there's your ball game. But Oregon's front played well. Secondary is going to be better. I like that. The other piece here that I think is really important is this defense is playing right now the best that any Oregon defense has played in modern history. The Gang Green defense was really opportunistic. They had a great secondary. Jeremy Asher, Rich Rule were phenomenal linebackers. They had Herman O'Berry and Alex Molden and Kenny Wheaton and Chad Cota in that secondary, a lights-out secondary. They had nowhere near the front that this front is, and they gave up points. They won games, but they turned the ball. They forced turnovers. They made plays. They were not just a shutdown group. Texas Tech averaged roughly 40 points a game. and Oregon blanked them. And now the narrative, and we both said we don't think this Texas Tech offense is very good. That isn't to say we thought Oregon will easily blank them. Like, the narrative has now gone the other way with that game, which I think is funny. Oregon blanks Texas Tech, and everybody goes, well, Texas Tech offense wasn't very good. And it's like, well, even if they weren't, if you blank Northwestern, if you blank Michigan State, you blank anyone, that's incredible. You blank a team that got a buy into the playoffs, you're playing great football. So I think we're underselling the narratives with Oregon a little bit nationally, that, hey, if we're talking about best defenses, everyone wants to talk about Ohio State, everybody talks about Miami, Texas Tech. Oregon's a top 5 defense in the nation for the last month. They just are. And that's a big deal for an Indiana team that the last time they played them didn't dominate, needed kind of a fluky field goal before half, needed Dante Moore to kind of implode late. I think that's really important. So I do think Indiana's going to have tough sledding because, like Oregon, they have all year in their big games. They haven't put up 40 on Ohio State. They haven't put up 40 on Penn State. They didn't put up 40 on Iowa. We dinged Oregon and said they averaged, 18 and a half, I think you said, on primetime. I listened. I tuned in. Average 18 and a half against like top 35, top 40 defenses, whatever it was.
It's like the six games that they played, they against somewhat quality defenses, it was 18 and a half. The only, and then the only outlier.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the only outlier in that was USC, whose defense is
not in the top 100 or right around 100.
Yeah.
Indiana's the exact same way against the same opponents. Iowa, Penn State, Oregon didn't play Ohio State. They've also struggled. So I think we have to play that both ways and at least accept that, like, this Indiana offense is not some unstoppable juggernaut. And a Heisman Trophy this year didn't mean what it meant the year Joe Burrow won. It's not all Heismans are built the same. I used to listen to Bill Simmons' podcast religiously. I haven't in a long time. He's going viral suddenly now for his movie ratings, but he talks about championship trophies should be different sizes. And like a year where the Warriors break the record for wins and then win the title or whatever. That's the biggest, that's the tier 4 trophy. And then there are years where guys get hurt, like the Toronto Raptors title. That's maybe more of a tier 1, tier 2 trophy. This would be a tier, the lowest tier Heisman. There wasn't a dominant player. Mendoza played well, but there are 3 or 4 games on his slate where you look at the stats and it doesn't line up with a traditional Heisman winner, where the guy averages, 80 yards rushing and 300 yards passing every game. Mendoza didn't do that. He just played really professional football for the number 1 team that was the story of college football. So he got it. I think that's important too.
He was the best player on the best team. And
that was it.
Yeah, if you look at the numbers, I'm going to pull them up here for Mendoza for the season, because most of the time when you go back and you look at the Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks over the last handful of years, they're responsible. Like some of these guys, it's usually around 50 to 60 touchdowns. I mean, some of these numbers, like the RG3s and the Tim Tebows and the Joe Burrows and stuff. I mean, some of these seasons are just monster seasons.
Yes.
Even like the Johnny Manziel, you're like, oh my God, it's 4,000 yards and it's 55 touchdowns. And sorry, my computer's being slow here, but I remember doing this around the Heisman and looking up Mendoza's numbers, and
3,100 yards, 36 touchdowns.
Yeah, so it's a nice year, but it's not. Again, if we're ranking quarterback seasons, this is closer to Jason White than it is any of the modern day quarterbacks. So you're right in that Mendoza in the big games that they have played, including Oregon's, it's not going to be a stat line that is going to wow you. And that's just Indiana in general. Nothing about Indiana really wows you. Mm-hmm. They don't. I was mentioning the other day that when you talk about these teams that kind of go on these runs, there's usually because there's some sort of gimmick, right? Even Oregon, when under Chip Kelly, when they didn't fit the national title profile, they had the tempo offense, right? There's usually some sort of thing where they do one thing that gives people problems, some sort of super creative defense where they run a lot of, blitzes at you and it's a really aggressive, or again, spread, or, tempo, air raid. There's some sort of weird gimmick that gives people problems. Indiana really doesn't do any of that. They just don't beat themselves. And I think in this world of college football, the one thing that we can't deny is that the highs have come back down. This Oregon team, Oregon can win a national title. I think we all believe that. I think all four of these teams can win a national title. And whoever wins this national title, whether it's Oregon, Miami, whatever, these aren't great teams. We said this at the start of the year, and that's why neither one of us thought that Oregon was going to win a national title, because I don't think this is a great Oregon team. And I still think that. And I think what's happened is I don't think you need to be great to win a national championship anymore. I think with NIL and the portal and the diluting of talent and the diluting of teams, I just don't think you have to be great. And so I think as the quality of teams has gone down, I think that has kind of allowed more teams to be able to compete. And Indiana right now may be that top team, but there's not that gap. Sometimes it's like, hey, here's the top 2 or 3 teams and here's everyone else. It's not. Here's Indiana, and I think here's everyone else. It's right there. And so this idea that they're this wagon that can't be beat, I don't buy it. I really like Indiana. I absolutely think they could do it, but there's part of me that still can't get over, and maybe this is just naive on my part because I didn't believe in Indiana last year. I didn't believe in them coming into the year. Now they've made me a believer, but there's part of me deep in my soul that just says there's nothing special about Indiana. Mm-hmm. and the talent profile and all of that. We've just never seen it. So that's what I guess when I want to see here is, does that still hold true? That every time we've gotten to this point, Cinderella, the glass slipper comes off, and really the more talented, deeper team rises up? Or are we really living in a new world of college football where Indiana shows us that all that we used to think about college football as far as talent and 4-star and 5-star, all of that stuff is irrelevant if you put together a good team that doesn't beat themselves? And maybe that's ultimately what this comes down to, is a better coach team that plays really buttoned up, that doesn't beat themselves, that doesn't do anything extraordinary, but they do everything really good, versus a team that maybe has more of this, but is the overall more talented team. And maybe that's what this boils down to. Does talent and sheer tyranny of will eventually win out over, just the well-coached, kind of the aw shucks, rah sort of thing in Indiana? And I don't know. I mean, I just don't know. That's why I think this is such a fascinating story, is I keep waiting for Indiana to stub their toe, and it hasn't happened so far.
To that point, I think there's a stat, and I can't find it now, but it's going on like 8 years, and it's an NFL draft dude stat. Mm-hmm. And there's points given for first-round picks, second-round picks. It's weighted based on value of like what the value is of a pick points-wise if you trade them. Does that make sense? They'll say the number 1 pick's worth 2,000 points, the second-round pick's worth 500 points, whatever.
Sure.
Something like 8 years in a row, the team that has the most points on their roster for that year's draft has won the national title.
Yeah.
Like literally the most talent has won the national title 8 years in a row. If you go and look and you project Dante to be let's just say top 5 pick, but this year.
Sure.
Oregon's that team.
Yeah.
Because of Sadiq and Thieneman probably coming out, Pregnon being a first-round pick. All the guys they have, Sadiq, and they're loaded. They have a whole bunch of like 4th and 5th round guys too. You look at it, and Oregon would be that team. So the trend of now almost a decade is most draft talent, most draft capital on your team for the next year is the national champion every year. And it makes sense. You go back and look at it goes back to kind of those Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, the Justin Jefferson, that era of LSU. And you look at Georgia when they had Jalen Walker, Mikael Williams, all those guys. Washington got close. They didn't win it, but they had Penix and then those 3 receivers, but they didn't have the depth that Georgia had. So Georgia ended up scoring more points, again, air quotes there, more points in the draft, and they end up winning. Michigan beating Washington. It was Georgia against TCU. Michigan against Washington. Michigan had more points than Washington. So that is in Oregon's favor. That's just a stat that has been lockstep solid for multiple years in a row. I do think Miami is good, and is going to score some points there with Ruben Bain and Francis Mauigoa, but they've got a bunch of guys who are younger that aren't going to score any points, including their freshman receiver. Carson Beck isn't what we thought he would be or what folks thought he would be. I don't think either of us bought in at all. But there were people talking about him being a first-round pick. He's not. That's a real huge point in Oregon's favor that I think a lot of people just dismiss or aren't even aware of. And I will find that stat and get it for everybody. But it gives an explanation of how the points are scored and says, if you have the most points in this draft, in the next draft, your team wins. That's simple. So Oregon's got a big, I think, edge there.
Well, for the star ranking, just to kind of piggyback on what you were saying there. So if you look at and so they basically took the two deep. So people that are going to play, right? Mm-hmm. So we're not going to, I don't even think they're even counting like a Trey McNutt in this, although he is going to play. And Trey was a 5-star recruit, but we're talking about just right now on the two depth. Going into this college football playoff. So that has changed maybe, and actually this would change in favor of Oregon. But if you look at the players that are going to be on the field, 5 stars, if we're going to add in Trey McNutt, there's 3 5-star kids that will be playing for Oregon in this game. Indiana has 0. 4-star kids, there will be 12 playing for Oregon. There's 2 that are playing for Indiana. Top 100 recruits, 9. There will be 9 top 100 recruits playing for Oregon. Indiana, 1. 2 stars or below. there's 2 of those, and one of those, by the way, is a kicker for Oregon, and Indiana has 10. So again, Indiana fans going to be looking at this right now and being like, well, F you, because by the way, Alabama had the exact same thing.
Yeah, but this is the pro Oregon pod. Like, it's intentional.
Pro Oregon pod. Yeah. It's the pro Oregon pod. So if you want something to kind of hold up here, it is that we have never seen a team, to your point, there has never been a team with this talent profile and certainly this gap in talent profile that keeps doing this. We've never seen it in the history of college football. It's never happened. So just that kind of piggybacks, not that and just off of the NFL like ranking, just even the high school ranking. I mean, it is alarming when you look at the thing that normally predicts college wins, and it is so tilted in one favor. For Oregon versus India. I just wanted to piggyback that because I had the high school star rankings up for the players that are going to play.
It's a really good point. On the offensive side of the ball, I got lost in the sauce on this one a little bit. Both ways. I've seen it both ways now. Oregon's offensive line looked lost the first time they played Indiana. They gave up 6 sacks. They weren't out-talented. They were badly out-schemed. And there are 2 ways to overwhelm a team. Oregon, and Dan Lanning will be right when he says in the locker room, we will not face a more physically imposing team than Texas Tech the rest of the way. Maybe Miami in terms of their edges, but even they don't have the interior that Texas Tech had, and they don't have the linebacker play that Texas Tech had. But Indiana, there are 2 ways. You could physically dominate someone, and the other way is schematically dominate someone. And Kyle Shanahan's teams schematically dominate someone, and that's as imposing at times as physically dominating. So you look at it and you say, Oregon's O-line should be fine against this D-line. You look at this defensive line. There is not an individual Ruben Bain. There's not an individual David Bailey. There's not even really an individual Danny Dennis Sutton from Penn State who could have potentially wrecked the game that Oregon played. But
Indiana's best defensive lineman is out. He got hurt celebrating, which is just a horrible run of luck for them. But
it's terrible. But
he's not. Yeah, their best lineman. In fact, their 2 best linemen because they've played the whole year without the other guy. But he got hurt in the beginning of the year, so they're actually down their 2 best defensive linemen. Although, like I said, some of that's kind of a moot point because they played the entire year without the one.
Physically dominating someone carries over. You play a team, and they might have a better understanding of your individual pass moves, but if Oregon played Texas Tech again this week,
not going to change.
David Bailey would be a problem. There's nothing. It's not like, oh, we saw him already. Yeah. Schematically, you can correct a lot of that stuff. Not all of it, because teams can always throw different wrinkles at you. But once you've seen, okay, these are the exotics they run. These are the exotic blitzes. This is how they mask their coverage with the safeties like this. We've now seen it, so we're not going to be caught off guard by it, and we'll be okay. I thought and I've watched the game now 4 times. Dante Moore clearly gets hit early and from then on does not seem right. He doesn't feel like he trusts his O-line, and he doesn't feel like, to me, he trusts what he's seeing in the secondary. There are situations, multiple, where he's got a guy open underneath, and instead he hangs on the ball too long, looking deep for Moore, for Sadiq in the seam, and instead had a crosser to Gary Bryant Jr., a drop off to Jamari Johnson, etc., and he just doesn't take it.
Yeah.
They will coach him up, and he has learned since to handle those situations much better. And I think that is a real positive in Oregon's category. You look at this game, and again, it ended up being 13-10 at halftime the first time around. Oregon misses a field goal, then kind of craps the bed defensively and gives up a really long field goal that barely goes in. Oregon probably should have been ahead at halftime and played the better first half. It's that things unraveled in the fourth quarter with a couple of picks and whatever. If you're looking at it, I don't think Indiana watches their offensive performance and goes, Jesus, we got to correct this. We had 5 big drops. Our offensive line didn't know how to handle their D-line. Now we do. They're saying they are physically overwhelming for us. Yeah. And we have to figure out protection because otherwise they will crush us from the interior. Yeah. Oregon saying we have to understand what they're bringing schematically. And if we do, our offensive line can physically hold up. And the nice thing for that offensive line is you're telling those guys, as long as you communicate, it gets a whole tier or 2 easier physically this week than last week. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely. What Indiana does so much is they run that 3 safety look, and they run a lot of rotational stuff where they show you one look. And this is like all the rage in the NFL. Look at what the Seahawks do. It's why the Seahawks play nickel and dime. When you can be multiple on your back end, you don't have to tip your hand on the front, right? And you have to be able to run people out of that look. And no one's really been able to run Indiana out of their looks. Oregon actually ran the ball pretty well. If you take out the Dante Moore sacks in that first game, there wasn't many explosives, and you're just not going to get explosives against Indiana. They tackle too well, and they played too disciplined. But Jordan Davison, he had 8 carries, and now these are limited sample sizes, but again, we're going to put a positive spin on it, right? Jordan Davison, 8 for 59, that's 7.5 yards. He did have the one long of 26, so he had the one big run. Whittington was 5 for 27. Long as 7. So that's not like anything to like, oh my God, jumps off at you, but that's 5.5 yards a carry. And then Lamar had 3 for 17 with a long of 7. So again, these aren't inflated by one big run, and that's 5, and a half yards per carry. So if you look at their 3 backs that actually got carries, that's a robust average. That's 6 yards a carry. So they did run the ball well. It's just that Dante Moore got sacked 6 times for negative, God knows, whatever, 30 plus yards. And so then that takes the team rushing down to, 81 yards, so 2.7. So that can be a little bit misleading. Oregon ran the ball a little bit. And I think Indiana is okay with that. I think that's the idea of, again, both of these teams, no explosive plays. And Indiana's whole thing is, if you want to run the ball on us, we're going to make you go 15 plays. And we think we're going to get a big play on defense. And so Oregon, I think, does need to stay patient. I think what you said was spot on. I think Moore got confused. And think about, like, when in terms of baseball, the reason why in Major League Baseball now that guys don't play 6, 7, 8 innings or don't pitch is statistics show the second time through a lineup, it's a little easier. The third time you see a pitcher, the numbers are overwhelmingly in favor of the batter. Why? Because you've seen his stuff. All right. He throws this fastball, and it takes me a little bit to adjust, and he's got a breaking ball. It's the old Bull Durham, Crash Davis. All right, Crash, you've seen everything he's got. And I think there's an element to that absolutely Dante Moore should not be as confused by what Indiana's doing defensively. Does it mean that he goes out and cooks them? I have no idea. But this should not be a 6-sack game. This should not be a Dante Moore doesn't know where to go with the ball. This should be a much better prepared answers to the test, right? Indiana throws a lot of complicated calculus at you, and it's hard if you don't have the answers to that test. And Oregon should have some built-in answers of, Dante, we're not going to get big plays. No one really gets big plays against Indiana. They just don't do it. So cool. Stop trying to push the ball downfield, and we are going to take what they give us. If they want to let us run for 5 yards, think about what Washington did against Oregon. excuse me, what Oregon did against Washington, where they played that light box and we're like, cool, you want to run the ball on us in first and second down? All right, we don't trust you on third down, right? I think that needs to be Oregon and be like, hey, if Indiana wants to give us 5 yards of carry running between the tackles, we will take 5 yards in between the tackles all day, every day. But Dante, when it gets to 3rd and 4, I can't have you making mistakes. When it's 3rd and 4, that's cool. We're in 3rd and 4. I need you to live in 3rd and 4. And I don't need 12 yards on 3rd and 4. I need 4.5. Right. So whether that's with your legs or whether that's Sadiq on a check down or whether that's throwing the little bubble screen and letting our guys be more athletic on the outside, we can live in this world. And we don't need to score. If we do this, we don't need to score 30 points to beat them. Let's rely on our defense. This is why I said I think Lanning is okay if this game is played in the teens and played in the 20s. I also wonder if he's going to play kind of more like the second half with Texas Tech. And if there's field goals to be had, take field goals. And I know that's anti-Dan Lanning, and he's been so aggressive, but I wonder if he realizes, or if he's thought, this game may be 17-14 or 13-10 Ohio State, and points are at a premium. So if it's 4th and 2 and you're at the 25, that's Dan Lanning 100%. We're going for it. But Sappington's been really good. And I just wonder if he looks at that now in this game and says, you know what, we're taking the points, because points may be at a premium in this game. I just think it's an interesting wrinkle that maybe wasn't there. I thought Oregon was a lot of times uber aggressive in that first one, thinking that athletically they could get over the top on Indiana, and they did not.
Right.
They did not. And so maybe, what do you do? Do you try to keep forcing that, or do you live in a world where there's nothing wrong with 3rd and 3 and getting 4? So, because are there going to be 6 sacks? No, but do I also want Dante Moore, dropping back and throwing the ball 34 times? I think ideally, maybe that's more like 25 with, and then that goes into more of a complicated thing of what do we do at the running back position? Because no Davidson, but sounds like Jay Harris is going to be able to go. So we're going to have Whittington and Hill and Harris will be the guys. And, it's not like, Whittington was the starter all year long. And I know Davidson kind of became the main bell cow, but the more talented of the backs is probably De'Aaron Hill. So maybe this is, and he's maybe the more explosive of the guys. So maybe not as much in pass protection. So maybe that's a wonky thing, which again, maybe you just, you lean more on let's get the ball out of his hands and play more of a conservative style. So there's just a lot of interesting wrinkles, but I can't believe that Oregon's going to play the same game against Indiana the second time around. I just don't. Well, second time around, I always believe it's easier for the losing team to make adjustments than it is the team that won.
Especially when the team you played or that won the first time relied on kind of surprising you schematically, not surprising you physically.
Oregon, that's a great. It really is a great point. I go back to that. If you're going to take one thing out of this pod, and I'll tip my cap to you with my shiny bald head. I'll tip my cap to you on that one. That is the best point that I've heard made in this game, is simply that there is a difference between being overwhelmed physically and being out schemed. Because like you said, when you're, I've been both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've had my ass whipped by a team that was schematically better than me, and I've had my ass whipped by someone that's just physically better. And I am telling you, there is a huge difference between the two. Even now in some of my dumb hobbies that I do, whether that's, I box and I do jujitsu and I punch people and dumb crap like that. Even as an old man, when I go out there is a difference between, like, if I'm going with a really high level black belt, right, that just has all kinds of slick tricks and he catches me and stuff. If you've ever watched, the boring part of the UFC when people are on the ground, some of those dudes just have a million different tricks, and they wrist lock you and you get you in all these kinds of weird things, and it can be really frustrating when you're like, man, this is tough. No matter what I do, this dude's got some sort of slick counter to it. I think I'm doing well. And then there's other times you just go out and there's like this 26-year-old Division I college wrestler who's just on every substance known to man, and he's out on the other side, and you look at him, you're like, oh shit. Mm-hmm. And he comes out and it's just a blitzkrieg, and there is literally nothing you can do. Mm-hmm. He just picks you up and just manhandles you. And look, you're going to lose both ways. But I promise you, the one that you have a chance is if you can avoid doing something stupid against the really slick black belt.
Right.
When you get the Brock Lesnar on the other side of things, you just shrug your hands and you're like, well, that guy, and this is the slick black belt. And you have to be more detailed, and you really have to be dialed in, and you got to make sure that you don't make dumb mistakes and you don't get caught unprepared, and dot the I's, cross the T's. But this isn't Brock Lesnar. This is not Joe Burrow. That LSU team with Jordan Jefferson and
Justin.
Justin. Why do I say Jordan? Yeah, Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase and Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Randy Moss's kid and Joe Burrow. That's Brock Lesnar.
Yeah.
Right? I don't care. I don't give two craps about the scheme you were running. Dabo Sweeney and those guys at Clemson were a really good team, and they were buttoned up, and there were NFL guys on that defense, and it did not matter. Mm-hmm. That offense was just a red hot butter knife slicing through your warm, doughy, soft ass. Mm-hmm. This isn't that. Right. Indiana is not Joe Burrow, and no offense, but little Charlie Becker, that ain't Jefferson, and that's not Chase. Right. They are not going to overwhelm you, or they shouldn't overwhelm you. And if they do, then you tip your cap and you just say, hey, for the second time, those guys are better than us. I just have a hard time believing that Oregon is going to get overwhelmed. I in my heart, I have a hard time believing that.
I do want to counter. You said Dante Moore shouldn't throw 34 passes or more. I do think there's a world. Bear with me here because I don't think it totally makes sense, but I do think this is a script that could happen. I think they could look at things and say, Lamar's out, Davison's out. Those are our two best helpers in pass pro.
Yeah.
And the thing that bothered Dante is trying to throw deep. What if we kind of force that out of his hands and we go Mike Leachy offense, a whole bunch of underneath stuff? You're right.
Sure.
Let's live in 2nd and 6. Let's get to 2nd and 5. Okay. What if we have 8 catches for 50 yards for Gary Bryant Jr.? Or, Malik Benson has his deep shot, but other than that, he's got 6 catches for 34 yards, and it's underneath stuff. DeCorian Moore has 4 for 32. There's, Jamari Johnson and Kenyon Sadiq each have 5 catches. They each get around 50 yards. If you keep everything underneath, and maybe you have 30 completions on 42 attempts, and you limit the runs a little bit, you pick and choose your spots, you run 20, 25 times, but you throw underneath and use a lot of the short passing game as your run game. Mike Leach used to say short passes are our run game. Oregon may go to that in part because they want to stay balanced. They want to keep, Indiana on their toes as far as dealing with both the pass and the rush, but they also don't want to get in a spot where staying balanced means drop back passing on 3rd and 6 or, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9. Yeah. Because they don't necessarily trust the back that's back there, and their offensive line got lost and gave up 6 sacks before. And it leans into what Dante struggles with, I got hit, now I'm looking for the big play. So I think because of all of those things, I could see a world where there's a lot of underneath stuff, very similar to what we saw against Texas Tech, but for different reasons. So I do think that's a possibility. The other point I want to make, and I know you got to get out of here, is this team is entirely different offensively than they were when they played Indiana the first time. Yeah. We were still saying we don't know their running back rotation. To keep in mind, Lamar was still basically RB2 in terms of snaps at that point. He wasn't in terms of carries. He was in terms of snaps. Whittington was 1. And if you look at this game, Jordan Davison had 8 carries. Lamar had 3. The next guy that ran for any yardage was Jay Harris, 1 for 1 yard. Okay. Jordan Davison, Noah Whittington, Jaden Lamar was the rotation. Davison's out because he's hurt. Yep. Whittington's RB1. De'Aaron Hill used very differently. When they ran against Indiana, he had 3 carries for -3 yards. All 3 were outside runs in 2 running back looks that Indiana just sniffed out. It's like, you're not going to be able to do that on us.
No, if Oregon runs the ball, it's going to be in between the tackles.
In between the tackles. And you're going to get a healthy dose of De'Aaron Hill, Noah Whittington, and probably on some short yardage stuff, some Jay Harris. That's going to be their trio. You look at the passing game. Now, we didn't even really mention Johnson as a receiving option much.
Yeah.
Jamari Johnson much all year until week 8. He's Oregon's Charlie Becker. No, he's not been as dominant. Charlie Becker's put up a bunch of 100-yard games. But in terms of a guy who opens things up, Oregon has 2 legit pass catching weapons at the tight end spot. So when they go heavy, you can't necessarily key it's a run play. You can't, because both Johnson and Sadiq can get out there and catch the ball. They both got good hands. That's a huge wrinkle. The last time they played, Benson had one catch for 44 yards. He ran his go. Beyond that, the next two guys that were targeted the most were DeCorian Moore and Gary Bryant Jr. Neither of those guys, in part due to injury, have been a factor, period, in about 5 or 6 weeks. Yeah. It's Benson, it's Sadiq, it's Johnson, it's McClellan. They are so much deeper and so much more trusting of that receiving core than they were the first time around. And I think that matters. The running back room is different. The receivers are different. The tight end, the way they utilize their tight ends is different. Sadiq said this week that he was banged up pretty severely the last time they played. He had 2 catches for 21 yards. That wasn't because Indiana snuffed him out. That was because he was banged up. Yeah. So I think this Oregon team was pretty limited in the who are we? And you go back to the last time Indiana and Oregon played. I think Indiana knew who they were, and they were like, teams aren't ready for it. Like, let's go, because they're not ready. And I think Dan Lanning thought they knew who they were after beating Penn State. All right, we know who we are. We kind of still have some personnel things to work out, but we know who we are. And they were wrong, because this team has evolved since then. And I don't think that's a bad thing when you have young playmakers. That's the way a season progresses. And Will Stein's added wrinkles and layers and all that. So I think this Oregon offense is very different. And I think it makes it that much tougher when you have to account for 2 really good tight ends. You have to now account for Benson being a complete receiver, not the one ball a game on a deep shot. McClellan's a good receiver 3. You've got Brian on the underneath stuff. Moore is more developed as long as he's healthy. There's a lot more to look at with this Oregon offense than there was weeks 5 and 6 when they played Penn State. And it was like, oh, De'Aaron Hill's suddenly the answer at running back. Who'd have thunk when they played Penn State? Remember, that was like a revelation? Well, now it's an expectation. Things have changed. So I think that's something to account for too, that this Oregon offense probably has another layer or 2, whereas Indiana's offense, they are who everybody thought they were, and Charlie Becker has emerged. So in terms of evolution, I give an advantage to Oregon's offense compared to the last time they played, compared to Indiana's offense. But I think that's as much as we can do, Pro. I've said all along, I stay with this. I think the final score is going to be like 27-20. I don't know who wins. I do kind of lean Indiana. I think it's like 60-40 Indiana. But the more I discuss this game, and I've discussed it with people who have coached and everything, they say Indiana overwhelming you schematically is so much easier to fix than somebody overwhelming you physically. And that's the number one thing people have said to me is like, Oregon's going to be much better dealing with that than they were. Whereas Indiana's issues with Oregon were physically overwhelmed, and there's no fixing that. There's no fixing, hey, Amari Washington has 70 pounds on us and we can't handle it. There's no fixing that. So I think that's stuff to watch in this one. I do think it's going to be a great game. If Oregon wins, I'd be annoyed a little to hear an I told you so from a bunch of Oregon fans, because I do think it could go either way. I really believe that. I just think Oregon has kind of shot themselves in the foot too many times in every big game they've had against a quality opponent. You think, oh, they should have 20 right now, 3. Mm-hmm. Oh, they should have 17 right now, 6. And they did it against Penn State. They did it against Iowa. They did it against Texas Tech last week. And as you said in the last pod, at some point we have to believe that you are who you've shown us that you are. And Oregon has been a team that has unfortunately left 10 to 14 points on the field every big matchup in the first 2.5 quarters. They've just done it to themselves. And if they can correct that, and you're going to give them those efficiency 10 extra points that they haven't delivered before, they're going to win this football game. And if they stay being who they've been, they're going to lose a close one. And that's what it comes down to me.
It's a really good breakdown and well put. Oregon has to be better than they've been all year, and Indiana doesn't. Indiana just has to be Indiana. If Indiana plays the way they did in the Big Ten title game, they do against Ohio State, Indiana wins this game, and Oregon needs to be better. They have to play their best game, and they're certainly capable of it. Absolutely, they are. It's just, again, every game you could look at, maybe not defensively, but offensively, you can look at it and say they've yet to put together a game against a quality opponent where we said that's the fully operational Death Star. So after all this time, is the Death Star finally operational? And if it's not, is the defense good enough? And I said it a couple weeks ago, and I will continue to say it. If Oregon wins a national championship, and it's funny because I think Dante Moore is going to be a top 3 pick whenever he decides to come out. It's just weird to say. If Oregon wins a national championship, it will not be because of their offense. If Oregon wins a national championship, it will be because of their defense. And that's apropos because it's Dan Lanning and it's Georgia, and their 2 titles with Stetson Bennett. Stetson Bennett was a really good college player. And take nothing away from Stetson Bennett, Georgia is what won them their national titles, and that will be Oregon. If Oregon wins, it will be because their defense. Because I just don't think you're scoring 35 points against Indiana. It's not happening. It hasn't happened. So I don't think that's all of a sudden going to creep up. So can your defense be dominant and can your offense be good enough? And it's funny too, you mentioned that the 2 tight end thing. Do you see some more heavy 12 personnel? The one thing we talked about Indiana, right, is they don't really they play nickel. They want to play in that nickel world, and it's like, you will not run us out of what we do. Okay, well, you have 2 very good big physical blocking tight ends, and also when you have blocking tight ends, that can help you with some of the pressure looks. If you can stay out of 3rd and long where you can stay in those heavy personnel, and I know you're down with backs, but can you just try to run it between the tackles and pound them and live in that world where those 2 tight ends are matchup nightmares? And I want to see what Will Stein has come up with, because I do think that with the time to prepare and again, going back and looking at the first one, there should be some more wrinkles to Oregon in this. So I know everyone's picking Indiana, and I get it. I get why. I mean, I'm picking Indiana simply because Indiana's proven it to us. But if you don't think that Oregon has the capabilities to beat them, then you just aren't watching, and you don't understand how good and how talented Oregon is on that side of the ball. They just have to put it all together. And, that's teams that win titles. Sometimes that's what happens is you get in the right spot and you put it all together. See Ohio State last year. Ohio State was so talented last year, and all year they just never quite put it together. And when it mattered, it came together. And all of a sudden it was like, holy crap, here it is. So, can Oregon put together their most complete effort? If they do, they'll be playing, I believe, Miami for a national title. If they don't, then we'll see if Cignetti ends up capping the greatest story in the history of college football. I can't wait. I just think this game is going to be great. The first one was a classic, and I think this one's going to be a classic. I think this is going to be, I would be shocked if in the 4th quarter, this is a 2-score game. I think this is going to be one way or another in the 4th quarter. I think this will be a 1-score game. I truly believe that. I don't think either one of these teams is blowing the other one out.
Regardless of how it goes, we will be live on YouTube right after the game. And when we say right after the game, I'm literally setting up as the final snap is snapped. And then we kind of dink around a little bit for 2 to 3 minutes to give people time to jump in. But it's literally like, have your laptop open as the game ends, because we're going to be live. And we usually go for roughly an hour, like a normal pod, breaking down all the instant reaction, breaking down the game, where things went right, where things went wrong. So join us there. It's been very popular, and that's kind of why we're doing it. And it's a huge game. So we want to give that to you as soon as we possibly can. Again, that'll be on YouTube. You have to go to live, like a streams. It's not where the normal videos are. You go into streams and you can see it. We'll both tweet out the link during the game. But join us there. We'll break it all down regardless of how it goes, man. It's been a hell of a season. Oregon's delivered above and beyond our expectations from the beginning of the season. A bunch of guys have delivered that we thought were a year or 2 away. And all of that culminates in Friday night's matchup, where they've got a chance to go to a 3rd national title game. And if they do,
they'll be favored.
It will be the best shot they've ever had to win a national title. Yes. Phil Knight's sports pants runneth over. It's an exciting time.
I believe, real quick, just whoever wins this game, this is I believe in my heart, this is your national title game. I think the 2 best teams left in the tournament are this. I think if Indiana or whoever wins this game, I think they hoist the trophy. So not to put more pressure on Duck fan there, but I truly believe that. So just saying that right now, I'll put it out there.
That's it for us. Thanks, Suke. Appreciate you, man.